Hi, I'm Wes Kussmaul. Today, I'll be discussing how the quality, that is, the reliability of a claim of identity, can be measured. An identity claim is binary, either valid or not, of course. By contrast, our level of confidence in the claim is far from binary. FIDO is ingenious. It's effectively a PKI platform where the relying party is its own certification authority. We're all familiar with this diagram that shows FIDO's registration or enrollment process, and this one showing how authentication takes place. If the user is able to sign the challenge made by the relying party's use of the user's public key, the relying party then knows that the user has the corresponding private key. They used to say that users don't care about privacy. Well, that has changed, and FIDO is there with its brilliant protocol that addresses that user concern. All well and good for the user. But what about the relying party? They have a relationship with the user, but how do they trust that user's claim of identity? Richard Parry explains why some relying parties need to be concerned.
Here's Tom. Here's Tom's phone. Tom enrolled in online banking using his facial image and fingerprint on his phone. The bank now knows it's him, right? The biometric technology in today's smartphones is really quite good. Here's Tom's financial profile. Oh, look, Tom bought 2 phones. He enrolled each of them in online banking using his facial image and fingerprint on his phone. Here are their financial profiles. Wait, Tom bought 6 more phones. Here are their financial profiles. Ah, the phone store just loves Tom. He just bought 72 more phones. So Tom is now 81 different people. His real self, plus 80 people he created. We'll call them Tommelgangers. Each has a financial profile and financial history. Their banks are pleased to have their business, although those banks don't know that they don't really exist. The Tommelgangers collectively owe millions of dollars. Tom thanks his Tommelgangers for the Ferraris and boats and other trappings of a good life he bought with the credit, but Tom decides that it's getting too much to track and manage. So one day he decides to make the Tommelgangers disappear.
The relying party needs some help. Sometimes identity verification is sufficient. And there's an abundance of verification help. That illegible third column and second column are all the ID document verification vendors that were too numerous for Gartner to include in its reports. It's a pretty crowded field. Of course, some of them are just white label versions of others. The third column is KBA vendors. Remember KBA, knowledge-based authentication, a misnomer? Anyway, none of them offers access to a permanent authoritative record of a measurement of the reliability of the user's identity claim. Not, is this the same person who registered earlier with the same fingerprint and face and PIN? We assume that's the case. But is she who she says she is? To some relying parties, that's not all that important. To others, it's very critical. And it's not hard to create a synthetic identity. In the US, banking regulations require extensive reporting on every case of suspected identity fraud. That gets costly and unwieldy. Better just to write off the account as a deadbeat. In these cases, we need an external certification authority whose identity reliability metrics serve to back up the FIDO key pair. Most of you are probably familiar with the ways that PKI certification authorities have historically reported on the current validity of an identity certificate. They consist of the CRL, Certificate Revocation List, and OCSP, Online Certificate Status Protocol. There is, however, a lot more information that might be reported by the certification authority, besides just whether the certificate is currently valid. So before we get into what might be reported along with a certificate, let's ask, what is a certificate? Well, a certificate, whether on paper or on bits, is authority attesting to a claim. Your birth certificate is some vital records department attesting to the circumstances of when you came into this world. A driver's license is authority attesting to your claim that you're competent to drive. Somehow, when PKI was just getting started, someone decided that anyone who can run a CA server is an authority. Somehow, PKI certification became a commercial industry. Matt Blaze shows why these guys should not serve as certification authorities. I learned this lesson the hard way. I owned part of a commercial certification authority that had a reputation for thoroughness in checking the claims of sites and identities. It had developed an integrity asset. When a company with a particular asset puts itself up for sale, it tends to attract buyers who lack that asset, right? So we sold it to a group that turned out to be fraudsters. I did well on my investment, but if we had known about the buyer's intentions, I think we would have kept shopping the deal. A certification authority, like a state's vital records department, should not be subject to sale. Just think about the implications of this ad. There's a function of governance called state. In computing, we also have something called state. I feel they're about the same thing. State is about defining what is, so that every element in the system can proceed on the same set of assumptions. OCSP improved upon CRL by reporting the active status, valid or revoked, of an X509 certificate in real time. But that's all OCSP reports. Naturally, the contents of a certificate don't change between the moment it's signed and the moment it expires or is revoked. That's fundamental to the nature of a certificate. That is, authority attesting to a claim, whether on paper or on bits. The content of the certificate is immutable, must be immutable. But what about information that accompanies the certificate? Mutable information, information that can change during the life of the certificate. Here's a car's license plate. In most jurisdictions, the license plate stays with the car for at least as long as it's titled to the current owner. But notice that little sticker in the upper right. That signifies that a certain authoritative mutable information, specifically that the current year's taxes have been paid, accompanies that immutable certificate. That is the license plate. There's also a sticker on the upper left. I suppose if I lived in North Carolina, I'd know what that's about. So if the license plate were an X509 certificate, those addenda to the certificate would be reported by OCSP+. That's the function of OCSP+. In its general case, OCSP+ exists to convey authoritative, that is, digitally signed, mutable information that supplements what's in an X509 identity certificate. The use case I'm presenting today is about identity reliability information. It's designed to supplement the FIDO public key by answering the question, to what extent can the user's claim of identity be relied upon? That information is mutable because additional evidence of identity, EOI, can be presented after issuance of the certificate, which makes the claim more reliable. Or evidence may appear that shows that the subject of the credential may have been sharing it with colleagues or family members, in which case it becomes less reliable. A number of attempts have been made to measure the confidence we can have that an identity credential's claims can be relied upon to be accurate. Here are a few of them. I'll briefly describe the Nist 800-63 set of identity quality standards. The US government's 863-3 was developed to provide technical requirements for US federal agencies implementing digital identity certificates. The guidelines cover technical requirements in each of the areas of identity proofing, registration, authenticators, management processes, authentication protocols, federation, and related assertions. 863 consists of three parts: IAL, which refers to the identity proofing process. So for universal credential, that's considered the enrollment process. AAL refers to the authentication process, and FAL refers to the strength of an assertion in a federated environment used to communicate authentication and attribute information, if applicable to a relying party. Like many identity methods these days, Nist 800-63 FAL attempts to combine authentication protocols and authorization information in the credentialing system. This not only complicates things, but introduces privacy difficulties. Authentication and authorization are very distinct processes. The first addresses the question, is this person who they claim to be? While the second asks, now that we trust their identity claim, should they be allowed to enter this space or do these things? OCSP Plus is about the IAL part. It's about reporting some attributes of an X509 certificate in an authoritative signed manner. It's giving the relying party's authentication, signing, or encryption key management system something to work with. But how authentication, signing, or key management is done using that reported information is beyond the control of the certification authority. IAL reports three levels of enrollment or proofing confidence. In IAL 1, there is no requirement to link the application to a specific real-life identity. Any attributes provided in conjunction with the authentication process are self-asserted or should be treated as such, including attributes a credential service provider or CSP asserts to an RP, relying party. In IAL2, evidence supports the real-world existence of the claimed identity and verifies that the applicant is appropriately associated with this real-world identity. IAL2 introduces the need for either remote or physically present identity proofing. Attributes can be asserted by CSPs, service providers, to relying parties in support of pseudonymous identity with verified attributes. In IAL3, physical presence is required for identity proofing. Identity attributes must be verified by an authorized and trained representative of the CSP. As with IAL2, attributes can be asserted by CSPs to relying parties in support of pseudonymous identity with verified attributes. In OCSP Plus, the rating number 1, 2, or 3 is supposed to be signed by the relying registration authority, the RA. If they're a public official, such as a remote online notary, as commissioned by the Commonwealth of Virginia and some other jurisdictions, and if they've received additional training and enrollment procedures, they're called an attestation officer. Any notary is a public official, an officer of the public, with criminal as well as civil liabilities. That is important. Another system for rating the reliability of the claimed identity is in a credential is OSMIO IDQA, or Identity Quality Assurance. The enrollment process starts with collecting EOI, evidence of identity. EOI comes in 8 categories. Each is rated on a scale of 0 to 9 for an aggregate score of 0 to 72. I'll go over each in a moment. The results of an IDQA query can be used programmatically by an application, or they can be displayed as a badge. There are a few versions of the badge. Here's one that goes with digitally signed content on a web page. Note that this certificate has expired, so the identity quality score is 0. Here's one that goes with a member's assertion on a site called BoatShare. Note that no personal information is disclosed, but you can click on items to request specific PII from the person identified. So would you rent your boat to someone with an IDQA score of 11 on a scale of 0 to 72? Or would you ask them to please set up an online session with an attestation officer to upgrade that score? I'm going to take the metrics slightly out of order because Nist IAL corresponds to Osmio IDQA metric number 2, as it measures almost exclusively the quality of the proofing process. For a closed ecosystem such as the US government and its agencies, that's sufficient. The credential itself is an artifact of that system. However, universal identity systems such as FIDO and EIDAS have wider ambitions. They've been built with the assumption that the combination of a device you carry working in combination with a cloud service will allow you to authenticate anywhere to anything. For that, you need a more robust measure of identity reliability. So in addition to metric number 2, quality of proofing / rigor of enrollment practices, we have, does this credential protect personal assets? Starting with the credential itself. Is it owned by its user or by the principal relying party who paid for it? If it's owned by its user, it can be assumed that it will be better cared for. Does it protect the user's financial assets? How about reputational assets that are used in the social networks where the reputation is built? Is the credential truly universal? Can you use its certificate to support a FIDO assertion, for example? How good is the certification authority? Does it represent real authority in the domain where it's used? Or is it these guys? Who else says that you are who you claim to be? Can you show your attestation officer that an eBay, PayPal, LinkedIn, etc. account is controlled by you? Can you show the attestation officer employment or school credentials, etc., that support the identity claim? Metric number 5 encompasses a lot of what identity systems are built on. Is the key pair 1024 bits, 2048 bits, or 4096 bits? How many factors to unlock the private key? Is the private key embedded in the phone's secure enclave or secure element? Is there a bond behind this identity claim? While in most cases the score would be 0 or 1, there are relying parties such as online commercial real estate auctions where the cost of a bond would be easily justified. A British electric power IT systems company once presented me with some very demanding identity quality requirements. When I told them an enrollment to their identity quality standards would cost upwards of £1,500, they didn't flinch. Enrollment can cost anywhere from 0 to thousands of dollars, depending upon the identity quality requirements. How long has the credential been used without incident? Has there been evidence that it's been shared with colleagues or family members? Has a non-duplication audit been performed? So you can't go around defrauding people and then enroll under a new identity. We needn't dwell on the consequences of inadequate attention to identity reliability. We've all been seeing consequences, but this one never seems to get enough attention. It cost the stockholders of Nortel $250 billion, compared with the Equifax breach with losses of a mere $250 million. Here's how OCSP Plus is implemented. Technically, OCSP Plus is just an extension of OCSP as it's described in RFC 6960. It communicates via ASN1 messaging over HTTP. Stapling can also be used so that a recently signed OCSP Plus report can be used, although OCSP stapling should be used judiciously. The IDQA portion of the record, which OCSP Plus reports, consists of 8 digits in the form of signed JSON LD data. It's up to the relying party's application to associate each digit with the thing it measures, and for that matter, to sum the digits. No PII is reported. However, the subject may maintain a personal information vault made with PKI digital construction materials, and the URL identifying that vault may be conveyed. The structured personal data inside the vault is managed by Tim Berners-Lee's SOLID program, while the unstructured part is of our design. We also add legal components. If this is the first interaction between the relying party and subject, then the relying party implicitly or explicitly agrees to the subject's personal NDA and requests a license to specific data fields in their personal information vault called MOI. The subject can issue licenses in advance when expecting queries from a particular relying party. So for instance, if a user is shopping for tires for their car, they license relying parties in the category called tire vendors to know details about their car and their driving habits. After tires are purchased, those licenses are revoked. So OCSP Plus is a protocol that can be used with a credential that's owned by its issuer. The owner user can then decide what information about a relying party she wants to share with another relying party. There's no jumbling of authorization and federation with identity validity. Naturally, the relying party will have expectations and requirements about what information they need in order for a transaction or a relationship to happen. But the identified person initiates and controls the disclosure. I've mentioned that OCSP Plus can report on any mutable information that is to accompany a particular certificate serial number. However, we're only implementing IDQA reporting at present. Applications can also implement weighted scoring, as the importance of a particular identity quality metric will differ from one relying party's application to another. The examples I use are a social network for pre-COPA children, that is kids under 13 years old, versus an online commercial real estate auction. So in the pre-COPA children's network, you want to know that an 11-year-old girl isn't really a 40-year-old creep. Thus, they would want to apply a factor to metric number 2, quality of enrollment practices. On the other hand, the online commercial real estate auction might apply a factor to metric number 7, the degree of assumption of liability. That way, if the winning bidder's identity is fake, they don't bear the consequences of taking an $80 million office building off the market while they sort out the problem. The need for identity reliability varies with the relying party, and the variation can be quite large. As I mentioned, some relying party applications don't justify any enrollment cost, while others justify enrollments in hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Regardless of which principal relying party pays for the credential, it's all one credential. Thank you.